Good morning, wherever you might be. It might be morning. It is 1 minute before midnight on September 13th of 2021. You know what that means? That means it is going to be exactly 5 years since I got confirmation on a contract that I negotiated with an organization that at the time identified itself as the International Business Group when it came to software, and a software company that was teaching a mobile app development class. So ironically, the last couple of days, when I've been trying to find information on this organization, I can't find that immediately. I get another organization that's identified as IBG, right? And it apparently involves a consortium of brokers, right? As if what was a shell company around a mobile app development class set up that was intentionally sabotaging people. It was attempting to teach, or alleging it was teaching, some form of software programming so that what? You could have a bunch of accounts that just were one or two letters off from the person's actual name. And then that could be used for trading, brokering, manipulation of the futures market. Did you think you had national security clearance? Did you think you were covered by some sort of directive associated with intelligence? Like the kind of thing that somebody might say would require a background check through the DIA? Well, see, in order to do something of that sort, and to say you're qualified to do it, you have to acquire certain kinds of permissions. If you don't and you try to force it, well, there is plenty and ample evidence online of that being identified as hacking. There's also executive orders by presidents of the United States and Congressional Research Service reports following up on terms associated with those executive orders, as well as legislative processes that have run concurrent concerning something called an insider threat. Have you ever heard of insider threat? You ever heard this term? Some people might say that legally, by the letter of the law, it qualifies as sabotage, perhaps even sedition. And if you're engaged in abuse of your position that you think might otherwise qualify you for some form of immunity, it could literally, to the letter of the law, especially if you're acting as a market participant as opposed to in your ministerial role, it could, to the letter of the law, be treason. Today is the 5 year anniversary, which means even though the contract was absolutely 100% fraudulent, engaged in bad faith, and an effort to extort me and anybody else that was involved in that endeavor, even by their terms, it's over today. See, part of the terms were that for 2 years, you had one term, but then for 5 years after that, you could not obtain a job with anybody else doing things that would have been a part of what you had signed up to do as part of that contract with anyone outside of the network without express permission from them. And the only person you were able to negotiate with was the president. Now, they didn't adhere to the terms of their contract in any way, shape, or form. And they were already informed before, I don't know, the end of a month after attempting to engage these processes, that they were in violation of the contract. It had been breached, and nothing about it was legally binding. But you know how people are. Some people absolutely 100% have every intention of engaging you through fraud and deceit, including in giving you a contract that not only is highly illegal, but that is intentionally contrived to be extortionate. And even before they let you review it with their lawyer, they've already signed you up and obligated you to its terms. So that's one of the reasons why the context around which you identify yourself at the inception of that effort is so important. For instance, if you say you were in a role where you actually were provided with the authority of somebody identified as a cabinet secretary, well, that's very important. If you say, for instance, you were in a role where you trained a group of people in order to be able to apply their critical thinking to accomplish an objective, that's very important. If you say things like, well, in Texas, we love our defense sector, that's very important. If you say you have a family member that is licensed and certified to do something professional like practice law or broker mortgages at a bank, that's very important. Especially when the contract terms out and you don't have any more justification at all in any way, shape, or form for saying that person was under contract and it was proprietary information. Like the Office of Foreign Asset Control's Derivative Kingpin Designations list. Have you ever seen it? Have you ever seen the comprehensive list of the Office of Foreign Asset Control's list of sanctioned persons? I've seen it before. As a matter of fact, sometime within the last year and a half, somebody was doing something very important that correlated with a series of executive orders. See, I've been having this problem for a while, for it seems now the last 16 years, wherein after the state of Texas changed its laws while I was in Texas for the first time, without telling me, I was engaged in processes that ran concurrent to me no longer being able to obtain a lease on a rental property for myself, much less getting access to the means by which to acquire my own mortgage. Even when I was working and making very ample money to do so, and my credit wasn't so bad, or at least it could have been repaired very easily if there wasn't a concern, I was denied the possibility of putting my name on a lease for now 16 years. Ever since I was in Texas. I believe if you do a background check on me as a renter, you will find the last lease I had my name on was in the state of Texas. Why is that? Well, at some point, my understanding is I was made a commodity as opposed to a person. It's one of the reasons why, without being completely conscious, but conscious enough in 2017, I was talking with other women. After, by the way, talking with a woman in 2016 in Chicago about something comparable, about how we should incorporate legally as small business owners so that we would be a corporate person to provide us with some protection and some effort at acquiring redress. Unfortunately, since the Army Futures Command actually went before members of the Senate and said things that by law, actually, they're not legally eligible to say and then get away with saying they're also qualified for federal appropriations by law, including by military law. Ever since then, there's been a very concerning predicament with small businesses in this country, right? And since the CARES Act, I contend this has become more accelerated. Not just because there are so-called small businesses that I understand don't meet the legal definition of a small business, comparable to what happened after the implementation of measures to disperse aid to various banks and financial institutions, presumably to support small businesses during COVID-19, only to be found that it wasn't small businesses that were getting that relief, right? And presumably there was supposed to be a crackdown because they were going to monitor very closely efforts to defraud the COVID relief, which thus far have not materialized. I believe there's something comparable going on with Department of Defense awards to small businesses, at least since the onset of COVID-19. But more than that, I'm concerned about these derivative reportings. Why? Because for at least the last substantial amount of time, I've understood somebody's been trying to resurrect old financial arrangements that were made when I worked at a nonprofit organization with another person. And my concern is that what happened was it was a part of somebody's alleged intelligence strategy as part of their presidential election campaign. That while it correlated with things going on with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which correlates with why I can't get a rental lease, much less my own mortgage, what it also correlated with was a number of pieces of legislation that didn't get passed, by the way, but got proposed by those candidates. And when one of them became president, and the other candidate or candidates ended up doing what they were doing under the subsequent administration, those proposed pieces of legislation that didn't get passed ended up turning into policy aims effectuated under their respective purviews, including under respective purviews that are now evidenced through third-party audits they commissioned or that were supposed to occur on their watch. And in the meantime, there has now been a substantial period of time where I contend the loans they took out, including using people's human and political capital, including the human and political capital, people that were their political opposition, turned out. And when that turned out, what's happened now is they've swapped it. And they engage in a process that I just heard described in a written record by somebody identified as a university student. It discusses the relationship of the SNL crisis to the Iran-Contra affair and the understanding of the land flipping, or rather the mortgage flipping. See, house flipping was a problem in Chicago ever since the mid-90s. It was something that was addressed as part of the Chicago Plan for Transformation of Public Housing. It had a different amber up north. It's kind of like poverty. It's different. Racism, it's different, but not that different. You take something, an underlying security, like a mortgage, and you just sell it back and forth between people that are friends or in the same network. And you mark it up, you mark it up, you mark it up during the day. So all the deals you've connected to it that are marked, that are part of those sales, well, they end up looking really good. But by the end of the day, what do? Well, if you're in Texas, you get one of those nice little kickback schemes that you got in on when you got an opinion from the Attorney General. And it's really good if you got one on either an ISD, but one on eminent domain. So find a reason to condemn them. And since the Affordable Care Act, I contend a really good way to condemn them is to make up some sort of accusation of a behavioral problem. They made us feel unsafe. They were speaking too loudly in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. They said or did something that we thought was a threat to a staff member or law enforcement. So what do? You ban them from the facility. And when you do that, what happens then? Well, by the end of the day, that deal has been really, really marked down. It's been discounted. And what do you do with a discount deal? What markets are available for something that's been delinquent or that's been that bad? Something in that kind of a trouble. Where do you sell it?